friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be my final set of reviews for SPFBO 9 finalists, and for those of you who don't follow this competition, SPFBO 9, or well just SPFBO in general, is the self-published fantasy blog off that is hosted every year by the author Mark Lawrence. And basically I am not a judge for this competition in any official capacity, but Mel from Melanor Reads got a group of us together that all have a platform of some kind, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, etc., for our book reviews, and we got together to read and review all 10 of the finalists from this year's competition, and basically just, for one, get more eyes on them and promote them to people, but also to just see what we think and hopefully find new favorites and love these books as well. So like I mentioned briefly, this is my last of the reviews, so I actually have done 2 other videos in each of which I have reviewed 3 of the books, so 6 total, and I will have those videos linked down below if you're interested in seeing my thoughts on the other SPFBO finalists from this year. But the 4 books that I am going to include in this video right now is The Last Fang of God by Ryan Kirk, Murder at Spindle Manor by Morgan Stang, Cold West by Clayton Snyder, and Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. So I am going to just review these in the order that I read them, and this was like longest to shortest. I decided to end up going starting with the longest books first, which were like more in the past. These 4 were all pretty short, but I was still reading them in that order. So with that said, the first one that I finished in this section was Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. So the essential setup for this book is that we have our main character, Ambrose, and Ambrose lives in this town that is actually a very interesting setting because it's essentially set at the bottom of this canyon, and this canyon is set kind of in the middle of a well-traveled area between other places. So at the base you have a town and lots of shops and houses and other things basically carved into the rock, and a large part of what this town and the other, like, what's the word I'm looking for, like shop owners and store owners, they cater to these adventurers. So Ambrose, for example, is a potions master, and some of his friends on the street and other characters that we meet run like an armory, or they make wands, or they do other sorts of things that are all sort of magic oriented, and they cater to their main customers are these people that are buying these products to go fight monsters and to go do things that show you that this world has more layers to it, but we're kind of focused in on this small town. And so Ambrose is a bit reserved, he is a bit maybe shy or standoffish, but he's getting a new neighbor across the street. Someone has bought this storefront and is moving in, and it turns out that this new addition is another potions master. And so Ambrose basically just looks at this guy as a rival who has chosen to move in and open another potions shop just to make his life more difficult, and it kind of goes from there. It is a cozy, like, romantasy that's definitely on the Legends and Lattes side of things, but it does have some stakes. It is very much similar to Legends and Lattes in the sense that there are some things we're working towards, and there can be some like slight dangers at times, but you really get the overall cozy vibes. So I am going to go through the breakdown of what I rated this book. First of all, I gave the characters an 8.5 out of 10. I thought they were very strong, especially as I mentioned earlier. We have our main character Ambrose, but we also have not only our new addition to the street, but we also have all of these other people who are essentially like a found family friend group who run the other shops on this street, on this stretch, and they are very distinct. They are very like charismatic, I found, and warm and inviting. So I really enjoyed reading about that group, and I also really enjoyed the dynamic that emerges between Ambrose and Eli. And I hope I'm not getting that name wrong, because I just started reading another book that has a character named Elias, and I think I might just be combining them. But I really enjoyed the way that the 2 main characters played off of each other, because we do get his perspective as well as Ambrose's, and I thought that it was really balanced and really well done, and so I really enjoyed the characters. I thought that was a really strong point. Next up is plot, and I gave plot a 7.5. Still a very strong rating, but I also thought while reading this that plot was not necessarily the focus. It was more about the vibes and more about the characters and the growth and the like finding each other and the dynamics there. So like I mentioned earlier, there still was a plot, like at certain points there were still things that needed to be worried about, but it was more of a cozy overall vibe, so the plot just wasn't as strong of an element, but I still liked it. And then next up we have world building, which I gave an 8. I really enjoyed the world building, and it kind of goes back to, again, what I mentioned earlier, where you get a glimpse that this world is wider than what we're seeing, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that it was well done. It was sprinkled in where we see that there are adventures that can be had, and there is like a kind of magic system that builds. I think that a big part of that was when like Ambrose is working on a potion. There is a lot of thought that went into how these things work, or even some of the other store owners, like maybe how a wand is built and how the magic works and the enchantments work and things like that. And for a book that was sort of a fun, quick read, I thought that a lot of those things were well thought out and I liked them. Next up is writing, and I also gave the writing an 8, just a solid 4-star. Looking back now, to be honest, it's been about a month or maybe a little bit more, and I don't really remember the writing, so I don't really feel like I can tell you anything specific about it, but I do just remember that it was solid. Like, I think that it fed my enjoyment of it, and it definitely like gave a vessel for the story that I was enjoying the way that it was being told to me, but I can't necessarily pick out anything that was very over the top or distinct necessarily, but that's not a negative. That's just to say that like I just remember it being good. And then finally, the last score is enjoyment, and I gave this an 8.5 for enjoyment because once again, this was just really fun for me. I wasn't totally sure at the start of the book, and I wasn't totally sold, but as it went on and as we saw the relationship develop, I really enjoy a good like rivals to lovers, especially if it involves someone who is not actually like mean and rude and standoffish, but it comes more from a place of insecurity or self-preservation and self-defense, and then when they have a good group of like found family that can kind of open them up and make them feel accepted, then the growth happens from there. I always kind of eat that up, and I really enjoyed the way that that developed, and I just had a lot of fun as a whole. So Arrival Most Vile ended up getting an 8.1 as an overall score from me, so that's around a 4-star, and like I mentioned, it was just a really, really solid, enjoyable read, so I would definitely recommend this one. Next up, we have The Last Fang of God by Ryan Kirk, and this is quite a short book, so I don't really want to say too much about it, but essentially the story that we follow in The Last Fang of God is about a man and his 16-year-old daughter, and we kind of get the sense at the start of the book that this man that we're following has a bit of a murky past where he has come to this small town with his wife who has passed away, but they came to raise their daughter in this small town and to essentially try to escape from the life that he used to live, which was a very warrior-like, bloody lifestyle, and his clan was almost destroyed with him being one of the last members that was left alive, and they just wanted to escape from that and raise their daughter. But when their daughter turns 16, they encounter this situation where she has enough of her father's blood in her that she is essentially being called back home by his god, and they need to answer this call whether they want to or not, because there are rites of passage that need to be observed for this clan that he was a part of. Otherwise, her life is in danger. So they need to undertake this journey, which is a very dangerous journey through like contested territory and other clans that would not be happy to see him because of things that happened in the past. And it goes from there, but it is very short, so it is actually quite easy to read. But for characters in this one, I gave the characters a 7. We don't have as many characters in this one. The main focus is our main character and his daughter, and they were both interesting to follow and like pretty solid, but I think that for me, they were just good. Like my connection didn't really go above and beyond, so I just kind of like was along for the ride and I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was exceptional necessarily. Then we have plot, which I gave a 7.5, and I think my main thing with this is that like this is, you know, a high 3-star, almost a 4-star. Like I thought that the plot was solid and the ideas were good, and even the execution like was good, but I think that I would have really enjoyed fleshing it out more. And actually I also gave the world building a 7.5, and I think that these two as a whole kind of get the same comments from me, where like there was some really interesting things about the magic system and using runes and the way that you can use magic to enhance your fighting, and even the plot where we explore some of the politics going on between these tribes that still exist and the gods. That is all intertwined with the plot and the world building and the magic. But honestly, it was just really short, and I think that I actually would have liked it to be fleshed out more, to see our characters connect more with the magic and with their setting. And I think that maybe that would have made it a little bit stronger for me. But like I said, as you can see, it's still like a high 3-star rating, so I enjoyed it. It just didn't quite crest that like upper level, I guess you could say. And then for the writing, I gave it a 7. So the writing, once again, like was solid, but I don't think there's anything more to say about it than that. Like it helped me experience the story, it was good, and it wasn't too much, like I didn't have too many more feelings about it than that. Then for enjoyment, I gave this a 7.5, which gives us an overall rating of 7.3, which I believe this is the one that I said is like uber specifically. If you really wanted to split hairs, it's a 3.65. So I gave it a 4-star on Goodreads because of course it deserves to get up to that next star level. But on Storygraph, I believe I gave this a 3.5. Once again, it's definitely one of those things where if you hear the premise of The Last Fang of God and you think it's interesting and you think it appeals to you, I definitely think that you should check it out because I did enjoy it. I had a good time while reading it. It was pretty easy to read and I went through it quite quickly. But it just, I wouldn't say it necessarily left a lasting impression. And I think that's the thing, where these ratings are like good, but not like up in the 4s, is just because I think it's good, but I don't think that I loved it. Okay, next up we have Murder at Spindle Manor by Morgan Stang, and this is an interesting one because this one I get the sense that it's very popular, it's doing very well in the official standings, and a lot of people seem to really love this book, and I liked it. So I do have some like complaints and things to say, but I did think it was still good. I think that the things that fell flat for me just weren't to my taste. So the concept that we're following in this book is that Spindle Manor, our setting for the story, is like an inn that people can stay at, and it's close to this big city. So it's far enough away that it's essentially like your last waypoint, a place that you would stay before you travel on to the city. And we have our main character who is a huntress and kind of like a magical detective who is pursuing this monster called like a doppelworm, where it can kill someone and then essentially assume their identity, and it's a very good copy of the person that it's trying to imitate, but it can't quite fully encompass the realms of human emotion, so that's kind of how you can catch it out, but you have to be very cunning to do that and clever. And so our main character has been following this group of travelers that consist of 10 people, and she knows that the doppelworm is somewhere among them. And she is staying at this inn at the same night that they are. And her goal is to use this kind of isolated setting and keep all of these people here as long as she can to try and figure out which one of them is not who they seem. And this is the primary goal at the outset, but then later in the same night, an actual murder is committed, and so we are then investigating that as well. And this group of people sort of has some of your classic like mystery characters, like you've got everybody might have a motive and everybody's a little bit different and they have a distinct characteristic that you could maybe latch onto to try and find clues. And from the outset, I was liking it and I was hoping to get more invested as the story rolled along, but unfortunately it kind of did a little bit of the opposite for me, and I will talk a little bit more about why in a second. But for the characters in this one, I gave them a 7. I did think that it was interesting following such a large cast, and I did think that she did a good job. But like I said, you kind of have some of the classic tropes of characters in here, and while that's not a negative in itself, I do think that with such a short book and so many characters, there are a lot of characters that didn't really get past that type of archetype. Like, they kind of stayed within the confines, and I didn't really connect to them, or I didn't really feel like some of them were more complex than that. Our main character and her kind of like sidekick, they were both interesting and I liked them. And I do think that the character work was good for the most part. But I think that that is the main reason why I gave it a 7, is because I do think that it was ambitious to take on so many characters. And I do think that a bunch of them just, they feel distinct from each other in the sense that they have like a characteristic, but they don't feel like too much beyond that characteristic. I also gave the plot a 7, and this is kind of where my main like divergence in taste comes in, because this is like a fantasy mystery. And actually I gave the world building a 6.5, and I'm gonna kind of combine these comments as well, because I guess you could call it a complaint. It's not necessarily about this specific book, but it is about mysteries set in a fantasy world, which I think I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant picking up going forward, because I personally find that if you read a like mundane mystery, let's call it, like set in the real world, whether or not you figure out the clues or like predict the reveal, generally speaking, once the reveal happens and you go back and look at like the Easter eggs that were left for you, when it takes place in the real world, it's drawing on knowledge that you already have about the way that our world works and the things that are possible, even if they're things that are intricate or you might not predict happening necessarily. But when it's in a fantasy world, the author has to give you all of that information in a systematic way. Otherwise, you are simply not going to know it, because you don't necessarily know how that world works and how it's different from our world. And so that's where I struggle, is because a lot of the time, like when information is revealed and something connects with something else earlier in the story, it is less satisfying to me, I think, because I couldn't have figured it out, because a lot of the time it deals with new information about the fantasy aspect of the world. So I think that that's why I don't mind it in regular fantasy novels, but when the fantasy novel actually is a mystery in itself and the main goal is to like figure out that mystery throughout the book, I think that's why it falls flat a little bit for me. And then the other thing about the plot of this one is that looking back, I think it was between around 70 and 80%. I kind of thought that the book went bananas. Like, it really kind of got crazy and off the wall, and maybe it worked for some people, but it didn't completely work for me. So I guess I still liked the book, but I was never able to love it because of how that developed. Next up, we have writing, and I gave writing a 7 as well, because I think that not only are we talking about the actual writing, like prose, which I thought was solid, but we're also talking about the choices that the author makes, like the pacing and the way that the writing is crafted and structured. So I think that that's kind of like where it fell a little flat for me, because like I mentioned, the pacing was a little bit of a trip for me, so it was sort of taking away from my enjoyment. I didn't love it. And speaking of that, I did give enjoyment a 6, which essentially is still kind of like solid and good, but not something that I really, really enjoyed. And it was a little bit disappointing, because I do love a mystery book, and I've talked about my reasons for why this didn't work. I won't harp on about it, but I think that I was hoping to enjoy this and love this, especially since so many people do seem to, but it just ended up falling a little bit flat, unfortunately. However, I know there are a ton of people that don't seem to mind like crazy bananas endings to a mystery, and you could even maybe call this a thriller. So if you're one of those people, you might actually like it a lot more than me, and I definitely think that you should give it a shot. So overall, this was a 6.7 for me, which is like a 3.35, so like a 3.5 star essentially, which was still not bad. Like, not bad at all, just had some things that didn't work for me personally, but could very much work for other people. The final book that I read for SPFBO 9 was Cold West by Clayton Snyder, and the premise that we're working with in this book is that we have our main character who, this is sort of like a Western, so our main character is sort of like a cowboy type figure, but in a bit more of a fantasy world, of course, who is sort of has hung up his like guns, or however you would say it, and he has been living a family life with his wife and 2 sons, but recently his wife has passed away from a sickness and he is struggling a little bit to support his sons. And one of his old friends from his like glory days comes to him and tells him that there's a bounty that they could go after, and that money would be very, very helpful for him in raising his sons. So he doesn't really want to do this. He doesn't really want to get back into it, but the value of that money is really he would be doing this for his sons. And that's kind of what ends up drawing him back into conflict and back into this old life that he used to lead. And I don't really want to say too much more than that because that's the basic premise. And once again, this is a very short book. So this one is an interesting one. I enjoyed some parts more than I thought I would, and then I didn't love other elements. This was still like a good book though, similar rating for me to Murder at Spindle Manor. So this one though, for the characters, I gave them a 6 just because I really feel like this is a book where we are following our main character and he is the only one that we care about. That was one of my complaints about this book because I actually did like our main character, but for me, I didn't really like the way like every single other character was handled, in the sense that they didn't matter. Like they didn't. You could tell they would be introduced, they would be killed off, they would be like given maybe a little bit of emotional depth, but it was clear by how they were like swept away that like they really did not matter. And maybe that was just the overriding like thing that was clear to me that just made me rate the characters a little bit lower, is because despite the fact that I did like the main character, everybody else was fodder for his emotional state, I guess you could say. The plot, I gave a 7 because I ended up kind of liking the direction that it went in, but I was kind of confused by the pacing and where we were going for like a large portion of this book, because I thought I knew what we were setting out to do, and it kind of turns out that that's not really what ends up happening. And I don't know, I'm not obviously going to be specific because I'm not going to spoil the book, but I just ended up kind of confused. Like I felt like I kind of liked it, but I don't know, which is why it's a 7, because it's just kind of good, I guess, but I can't really tell you about how I feel because I feel like I don't have strong positive feelings, but I also don't have negative feelings. It kind of just was what it was. So the rating is what it is. The world building I liked a little bit more. I gave that a 7.5. And I think that the magic was really, really interesting. So the setting here is sort of like, it's almost post-Holy War, because there's clearly a church and a religion that has taken a certain stance on certain types of magic users and has decided that other types of magic users are bad and they have tried to wipe them out, and that's a large part of why our character is in danger if he reveals like what he can do or what he is. And the interesting thing is that the magic users that are, I guess, approved of can do things with their magic, but the magic users that have been like attempted to be wiped out are magic users who can sort of negate the effects of other magic, but in doing so they may sometimes open a portal to the place where their magic is drawn from, and things can be let out through that are very dangerous and that nobody wants to see in the world. And that is a large part of why that type of magic is not fine. And then the rest of the world building in terms of any like political structures, it's a little bit fuzzy. Like it was explained, but we kind of hop around in time and in like flashbacks and in present day, and we get a little bit of a sense of what used to happen in conflicts and wars. But even so, in the present day, a large part of this landscape is still like Wild West-esque, so there isn't necessarily like government everywhere all the time. A lot of it is like, well, I was gonna say the Wild West as a saying, but it quite literally is that. So The world building was good and I thought the setting was interesting, but I guess I could have dealt with a little bit more explanation maybe. But anyway, I did give that a 7.5. And then for the writing, I gave it a 7. This is another one where like I enjoyed the writing. I actually thought that some of the style was really nice and fun to read and it was good writing, but I didn't really take anything away from it. I don't really remember it now, aside from certain aspects, and I don't know that I loved some of the choices when it came to describing things, because I think that some of the times it left me confused when I wasn't supposed to be confused, especially when it comes to that world building stuff. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe that was information that I really wasn't supposed to know. I was only supposed to be sprinkled in so that you can make your own connections, but I think that the writing was solid. I just didn't love it. I liked it. And then enjoyment overall, I gave this a 6.5, which means that the overall rating is a 6.8, which is a 3.4, 3.5-ish. So once again, this was a book that I liked. It is short. I definitely would recommend it because I think that it's unique and I like that about it. I have never read anything quite like that. And that's definitely a positive. Like, I think that people should continue writing fantasy books that are unique and different that we haven't necessarily seen before. I really like that. And like I said, like the writing and the characters and the world building, like all of these things, they worked together and they definitely did something that I liked, but it didn't end up being something that I loved. So that's kind of what the 3.5 reflects, because to me, a 3.5 is still a solid rating. It's just not quite making it to that 4-star and above where I can say that I really enjoyed it, really loved it. But once again, like I've said for pretty much all of these books, this is something that I would recommend if you think that it sounds interesting, because I think that people have a chance to love it. This is not a book that I think is bad. None of these books are books that I think are bad. I think they just have to find their audiences and they find people who enjoy that particular writing style, and that's kind of the point of this whole project, is to try and get people's eyes on these books that are the right people to be reading them. So I really hope that I can have helped to achieve that through these videos. So if you are watching this and if you've made it to the end, thank you so much. That's the end of these last 4 reviews that I have to talk about for SPFBO 9. And thank you, Mel, for organizing this and for inviting me. It was very fun, honestly, to broaden my horizons and to read these books that I might have read a couple of them otherwise, but I most definitely would not have read all 10 of them, and it was a really interesting and fun experience. So thank you for that. And yeah, that is it for this one. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you would like to see more from me. As always, I have all of my socials links down in my description if you're interested in that. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!